Okay, so what we have here is the Shimano Triton Stardrag GT, which when you look at it has had a very hard life and not been very well looked after. I've actually had the handle and that off already once because basically I had to take a blow lamp, pencil jeweler's blow lamp, get it red hot to actually unseize it from the shaft and also scrub off the shaft threads to actually even get the Stardrag off. It took about 25 minutes. You guys know exactly how to take one off in that condition. No point in watching me struggle for 25 minutes. I'll now put it back on so we can actually show the whole dismantling. You start off by removing the screw here, and a top tip is always drop all the bits into some sort of container. The other thing you need to watch with any reel, I always work on some sort of soft cloth or a towel. If you drop metal components on a hard surface, they tend to bounce and vanish and you spend half your life searching. At least on the towel they've got a chance to just thump and stop where they are. Handle comes off, Stardrag comes off. Often appear in these videos with a bit ham-fisted and whatnot, but I'm actually trying to hold stuff so you guys can actually see what I'm doing, which is not how I'd actually hold it if I was just sat down taking the thing apart. Stardrag comes off like that, nice and simple. Everybody with multipliers always has this fear that when you take them apart that springs are going to come flying off all over the place and you'll be searching for them. To be honest, that doesn't really happen with any of the multipliers. There's a couple of them if you don't take them apart in the right order. Abu 7s, for example, half the mechanism is on the back plate and half the mechanism is on the front plate that you take off, so you tend to take them apart, and if you don't release the actual spool release lever here, the mechanism for that's on the back plate and it pulls the whole thing to bits and you end up with a table full of spare parts, and if you don't know how they go back together, can be quite fun. It's actually quite simple putting them back together if you do end up with them everywhere, as long as you know exactly what you're doing when you put them back together. Otherwise you end up, as with anything, a large box of bits. Some reels you end up with a right caper trying to beat the screws out. Better quality reels usually come apart. Now don't forget, on this there are two screws on the back here, and a number of times I've seen reels that people have serviced themselves and they've forgotten about these screws and then broken the reel trying to prise the bits apart. Most stuff, if it doesn't come apart, it's because you've missed a fixing or a fastening. It's not that you need a bit more brute force to beat them a bit. This now slides off, nothing to go flying. That's the spool release. Very often that spring is one broken, or this is seized up, but not ever in Shimano's. Some of the cheaper reels, that's a cheap, poor quality white metal casting, it seizes. Perfectly fine, no point in dismantling that. Internally, as you can see, absolutely bone dry. Now this bearing on the front here, there's a little washer goes in front of it. The bearing looks pretty bad, but in honesty it runs quite smoothly, but I should be changing it anyway. They're £2 or £3, and where you've got it apart, crazy not to change it. Pack of washers that goes underneath the bearing on top of this. That's another washer goes underneath. Doesn't make a lot of us. Right, now you pull this off. Often it's quite tight, usually because you've got a little burr at the top here, which is for some reason is on there, which stops them coming off. It's usually this one that doesn't come off. The rest of them usually slide. Often if your drag doesn't work, it's because these drag washers have stuck together, and you know, basically whenever you fix with the reel, undo the drag, otherwise these stick together. If they don't, a very sharp blade gently pries them apart. Don't break the fibre washers or the carbon washers, because they can be a devil of a job sometimes to get replacements. You've now got ratchets cog here, Don't forget a little washer that goes there. You've now got 2 springs which hold the gear pinion in. Gear pinion on a carrier, and that's the slider that moves the gear pinion in and out. Comes off, that's this end. Now what you've got here is a small spring, which very, very careful not to lose these little springs, because you do need to have one that's the exact correct size, otherwise it just doesn't work. And that is very tight on the pin. Keep it all together, put it back in. That's that side of the reel done. Other side of the reel, 4 screws. Don't know why, but I always tend to loosen off screws like this, just slacken each one off a little bit before I go round and take them out. Don't think it makes a lot of difference. It does sometimes mean if you get one last screw which is a bit stubborn, you're not trying to batter that out with a thing loose and risk breaking anything. So by doing it this way, at least you check that they're all going to come out. Most of the better quality reels, you don't have a problem getting them out. Do stress, if you find the screw is a bit tight to come out, be very careful to use the correct size screwdriver, otherwise you chew up the actual edges of the slot. And a lot of fishing reels are made using what they call Japanese standard screws rather than straight crosshead. The difference is that on a normal crosshead screw there is a depression in the centre of the cross. On these Phillips ones, English ones, that depression is quite deep. On the Japanese standard ones it's quite a shallow one, so when you take a normal screwdriver with a sharp point, it doesn't quite engage the slots properly because it won't go in deep enough. Now you can buy an expensive set of Japanese standard screwdrivers, or you can take your ordinary Phillips crosshead whatever screwdriver, just grind the point off a little bit. It then fits perfectly and engages the points. You don't end up chewing up the actual slot. Now there's your clicker mechanism, on, off. That'll clean up in situ, no point in taking it apart for fun. That's just a bushing there rather than a bearing. Push it in, make sure it's in. Spool comes out here. There's a bearing on the end of there. That will just pull off, but that one's perfectly sound. No point in changing stuff for fun. See how somebody's been winding that in. That's the whole reel stripped down, ready. That will now go in the ultrasonic cleaning tank. Comes out of the ultrasonic, gets it going over with a stiff toothbrush. Use somebody else's toothbrush, not your own. When it's all cleaned up, we'll come back and do all the reassembly. Right then, everything's been cleaned, polished, ultrasonic cleaned, brushed. Resprayed the spool, so you can see that's all nice and looking smart. Resprayed the handle, resprayed the Stardrag, so it's all nice and tidy. We start the reassembly. First thing for the reassembly, I always like to put the spool in. A little bit of grease on the end of the spool, not too much. You're trying to grease it, not drown it. Take the end cover, a little bit of grease on there. Drop spool in, line it up. Now, the screws, there's 4 each end. The short ones go in the end here. Longer ones go in the handle side. Why they can't use the same screws in reels throughout instead of having this selection, I'll never know. Just requires design it so that it'll take the same size screw. Don't over tighten these, just screw them up and then little tweak just so it's solid in. Now we start on the top. First thing you put in is the slider. That fits in there. Make sure it's running nice and freely. Now we come to the pinion gear. If you notice on this, just here, there's a little chamfer, shoulder, whatever you like to call it, smooth edge, that goes downwards. The idea being that it can then slide easily over the lift plate, which allows the thing to slide up and down to engage and disengage the gear. Next thing you want to put in is a ratchet pull. This goes on that little thing there. Then you've got a little pin there which the spring goes over. Get a pair of tweezers, grip the spring, drop it over. Now, invariably working with springs, you end up very often where it pings off and you spend ages looking for it. And if, unlike me, you don't have a box of spare springs, what I would suggest is get a piece of bright red cotton, thread it through the spring tight in a loop, and if it does fly off, at least you've got half a chance of finding it. Next thing that goes on is the ratchet. Take note the teeth on this ratchet, that you want them facing that way. For reel-up-wise right-handed, pull the pole back, that sits down. Notice there's a square on the bottom, there's a square on that. Next goes the smaller of the drag washers, that will sit nicely down on there. Then you're looking at the main gear. Main gear drops straight on and sits down firmly onto the collar there. Everything is now nicely lined up. First thing that goes in here is a plain washer, like that. That's the one with the larger hole in, goes on first. Then the washer with the square hole goes on, fits down. Then the carbon type washer goes in. Then there's a washer here with some little ears on. You can see that. They go in facing down into the cutouts here. Then the other washer goes on. Now this washer, you will notice, is dished at that side, raised at that side, raised side goes up. That goes on and sits down on there. Next you want two springs, which is what returns the pinion gear. Then a little stack of washers. Then a small washer. Then the bearing, nice new bearing. There's nothing really wrong with the one that came off, to be honest, other than it looked a bit grotty. But as we're doing a complete rebuild, might as well put a new one on. That is the internals of the reel. Now this slider, you want to pull it to the top, yeah? This bit, you see, turns that way. That little bit there, you want that position at the top. Now when you put this on the reel, drop it on, ease it over there, wiggle it around. Now what you'll find is just move that back and forth and then it will drop in. Well, that's now sitting nicely down. With any reel, if it doesn't sit down nicely and go together smoothly, you've got something out of line, something not quite in the right place. So lift the cover again, make sure everything's sat right and do it. Reels always go together smoothly and easily. If you have to start forcing them or dragging them down with the screws, you've got something you've done wrong. Seen it so many times with Abu reels where people have tried to force the top cover down with the brake blocks in the out position. Make sure the spool release is now working. And they say, oh, it was all working perfectly until I put it together. You know, simple things like that, just get it right, and you say, right, that's all working. That washer now drops in on top of there. Stardrag goes on. Be very careful with a Stardrag not to cross thread them. It's easily done. You've got a thread that's squared off the side. Just spin on nice and easily, just like that. If it doesn't do that, you've got it on wrong. Turn that down. Spool release is working. Always worthwhile checking that spool release is working before you get too many screws in. Handle goes on. Just nip it up so as it's basically finger tight and just nipped up. And then just adjust it so as the nut keeper lines up with the hole in the handle. That goes on. And don't forget, there's 2 more screws under here. When I was trying to do these repairs, it always looked like I'm fumble fingered and all that. Trouble is, what I'm trying to do is hold stuff so as you can actually see what I'm doing rather than just seeing my hands in the way of everything. Which is not how I do it. I was just taking a reel apart and servicing it when I wasn't filming. Reason these Shimano reels and pen reels, when you open them up, are never full of all sorts of mess and rubbish like some of the Abus and some of the cheapy reels, is because they're so well sealed up and closed down. Right, that's it all together. First thing we do is tighten up the drag, check that's locked up and that is absolutely solid. Check that it's coming off smoothly. Check spool release is working. Feel it. Any spool should have a little bit of end float. Just feel a little touch of movement either way. Just like that. Job's done. That's basically turned what was, well, barn find of a reel into a really nice reel. We'll put a bit of backing, bit of braid on, put it in the cabinet. Good to go. Yours more service with a little bit of maintenance.